transfer it. Audio is available. You can check it.
It's plugged in. What should I be hearing?
Audio भी नहीं आया उसमें.
So it's live now.
You can refresh it. Audio is available. This is a live.
Okay. So that's the feedback.
This is a live view.
You've just heard.
So is it coming audio? Audio is accurate. Delay time is about 1 minute. The complete process time is about 1 minute. After 1 minute, the entire program is live. Okay.
There's a lot of background noise.
Sir, okay. So, good afternoon, everybody. We start the second day of sports book, farm, animal nutrition and welfare. And today's lectures will be based on nutrition and farm animal welfare, to be followed after lunch by practical measurement of nutrition and welfare.
Thank you, Mr. Prasenjit. We're going to leave the theory a little bit. We were talking yesterday about theory and what animal welfare is all about. Thank you. Today we're going to consider now the interactions between nutrition and animal welfare. And then after lunch we will be considering the practical measurements. So those two should come together well. If I'm talking too fast, or I say anything you don't understand, So I will be focusing, today we're going to consider now the interaction between nutrition and animal welfare. We're getting, and then after lunch, we will be considering the practical measurements.
I think you can say.
Right. I'll start. I'll ignore myself. Thing to do. I'm going to focus on beef, cattle, and sheep, particularly under rangeland conditions. And why do I focus on those animals? Well, the problems of poor nutrition are most acute, really, for the animals that are kept in more remote places. And the reason for that is, yes, beef, cattle, and sheep, they can exist with less water and less food than dairy cows and pigs and chickens, but also the variability in the weather in these situations is greater. So I know you don't eat beef cattle, but I'm just considering the more extensive conditions you would have in the northeast of India, I think, and also in the extreme northwest in the Kashmir region. So the reason I say that is because as rainfall declines in any continental region, as rainfall declines, it also becomes more variable. Okay, so the risk of drought and the risk of flood, those two extremes, is increased in continental interiors, essentially. So we're going to focus on that. Now, of course, modified for stomach, the first part of their stomach. So in that forestomach they have a fermentation vessel. Okay, so their unique strategy is to be able to digest coarse fibers that are present in the poorer quality rangelands. So they do that by the use of microorganisms. Bacteria, fungi, protozoans all exist in the rumen of cattle and sheep to digest the fiber. That, coupled with the mastication process, when the food goes into the mouth, they chew it for a long time, they swallow it. Okay, you've seen them do this, they then regurgitate it into the mouth. Have you seen this cutting process? Yeah? Regurgitate it into the mouth, they chew it again, down it goes, and each time the fibers are broken down a little bit more. So the cow is not digesting the food. The food is actually being digested by microorganisms in the rumen. That's a very unique adaptation. Do we see that in any other animals? The horse, camels, goats? Which other animals have this same function? Do you know?
Horse, sheep,
yes.
Camel also.
Camel, yes. All ruminants. Good. Yes. And what about the horse?
No, not horse.
Elephant?
Elephant.
No. So the elephant and the horse are hindgut fermenters. So their cecum is adapted for bacterial fermentation. And this is not such an efficient process because it's not at the start of the digestion. So with the cow has an initial digestion in the rumen by the microorganisms, and it follows that up by a standard digestive process in the small intestine. With the horse, of course, and the elephant, it has to wait until it gets to the cecum, before there is any bacterial fermentation. Not so efficient. Hence, the horse. I don't know much about elephant digestion, but we can talk about elephants in a minute. But the horse has to digest grass, which is quite short. And this is why, when you look at pastures, the horse is grazing on a pasture which is very diverse. There is tall grass here, there's very short grass here. Whereas cattle, they act a bit like a mowing machine. They will graze over the whole grass, taking all the grass. Sheep are a little bit more selective, that's right. So they will select individual pieces of grass. Why do they do that and not cattle? Any ideas? Any idea? Why are sheep more selective than cattle? Well, their mouth parts are very small. Sorry?
Because of the anatomy.
Yeah, that's right, yes. Because of the anatomy. But if you think of the mouth of a cow...
Cleft.
Sorry?
Cleft
palate, yes. And also narrow mouth parts. The mouth of a cow is like this. It's quite broad. It has a broad dental arcade. And also the feeding behavior is different. So the cow is designed to wrap its tongue. If this is a pasture, this is all grass going around, here's the cow's tongue coming in, wraps itself around, the cow then jerks its head backwards and pulls the grass off. The sheep doesn't do that. The sheep is biting with its teeth. So the behavior is quite different. And that allows the two species to occupy different ecological zones. So if you have a grazing system with cattle and sheep, it is more efficient than if you have one with cattle and one with sheep. If you mix them together, the sheep will eat some of the grass which the cattle left, and the cattle will eat some of the grass which the sheep left. So they are synchronized in their use of the land. And this is why I say there's not usually competition between herbivores for the grass. They all fit into a different ecological niche. In Australia, we have a lot of concern. The farmers, they get very concerned because they think that the macropods, this is the kangaroos, the wallabies, are eating the grass for their cows. So they go around shooting them all the time, shooting the macropods. They're not eating the grass for the cows. Come in, hello. Come in, take a seat. The macropods, they don't eat the grass of the cows, they eat their own grass, which is very, very short, because again they have those narrow mouth parts, cleft palate, and so they can eat small bits of grass. I'm just introducing nutrition, basically bovine, basically ruminant nutrition, and talking about the behavior of the animals in relation to their mouth parts, and saying that they all have a different ecological niche that they fit into in an ecosystem. They don't compete, they complement each other. So they work together. In just the same way, as an example, cattle and sheep work together in rangeland situations. Okay, droughts and floods. The rangelands are most prone to climate variability. I've said that. As rainfall declines, variability increases. It's a function of the prevailing weather patterns around the world. And this means they have a high susceptibility to drought, flood and extreme temperatures, and I'm sure you're all well aware of that after your big monsoons this year. And you had a lot of floods, I believe, especially in the north of the country, across the northern part of the country. And we have the same in Australia. We have in Queensland a big risk of drought in the interior lands, and also a big risk of flooding as well. In my time in Australia, which is 14 years, we've had 2 major floods, you know, when big valleys will go underwater. So what we have done through domestication is really two things. We make the animals more approachable by man. That's one of the main effects we do. And the other thing is that we have encouraged animals to be more suited to our purpose. And one of the ways in which we've achieved that is to have animals that store fat in particular places in their body. So we have fat-tailed sheep. We have cattle which store their fat in their humps, and they have adaptations, of course, to cope with the heat. So we've changed the morphology, changed the shape of the animals to fit our purposes. Okay, let's have a think about some of the major nutrition problems. So the first one would be undernutrition. Now, you may not have heard of that term before. A lot of people just say malnutrition. Malnutrition is a bad thing, bad. But undernutrition is really when the animals are just not getting enough food. A specific case of that is malnutrition, when the food is of the wrong type. The two tend to go together, because in undernutrition, animals will start looking for other sources of food, and they often find the wrong things. We'll talk more about that later. This is what we're going to consider under nutritional problems. So undernutrition, starvation in other words, short-term feed restrictions, because undernutrition is usually long-term. But I want us all also to consider what happens when an animal, particularly cattle, and I'm not just talking about beef cattle here because I know that's not relevant to you guys. I'm talking about any cattle. I want to consider short-term feed restrictions. What happens when you starve the animal of food very suddenly, like when they're being transported? What happens to the animal? And then we're going to consider toxic agents and pollutants. And finally, what's going to happen in the future? What are the changes which are happening in the world today which might impact on that nutrition welfare interface? Things like climate change, things like growing meat demand. We'll have a little look at those. What is undernutrition? Well, it is a prolonged inadequate supply of nutrients to sustain good health. So this word here is very important. A cow is not undernourished if she is only underfed for a day or two. It has to be over a period of time so that a steady state is reached. And it should be enough, if there is not enough nutrition to support growth, then in the case of immature and underweight animals, not enough nutrition for growth, then we can say that the animal is undernourished. It's a most common welfare problem for rangeland livestock. Now, how do I know that? Well, I spent quite a lot of time studying that. Is it really a problem in the rangelands? In your rangelands where you keep sheep or your cattle do not have a lot of food, how big a welfare problem is undernutrition compared with, I don't know, dirty conditions that they're living in, or other things that might dehorning the cattle, or other things you might do to them. And the way I addressed this was, first of all, to go and talk to the farmers. So I went round with my wife, I went round 50 farms around Australia that were all in the rangelands, and I talked to them and I said, what are your biggest welfare problems? And most of them said that nutrition was the biggest welfare problem. And then I went to ask the animal advocacy groups, the animal advocates. I said, what do you think are the biggest problems on the rangeland? And they usually said that the problems would be dehorning of cattle, castration of cattle, tail docking of sheep, all the things which cause pain. So I went back to the farmers and I said, the advocates are saying that it's the painful procedures that are the most damaging to your animals. Is that true? And they said, no, the animals, they get over that fairly quickly, but nutrition can last undernutrition can last for 3 or 4 months. And I saw farmers who literally had been broken by the state of their flocks because of the investment, the emotional investment that they have in their animals. If they see them dying in the paddock, it's really, really serious. If they see them in a little bit of pain after they've had their tail chopped off or their testicles removed, then it's not so serious. And I knew they were telling the truth. But what is the welfare impact of that undernutrition? Can you give me some examples of what things the animal might feel in response to that undernutrition? Why is it bad for welfare? And you'll remember that I said yesterday that welfare was really tending to be all about what the animals are feeling. I'm just going to pop that up so we haven't got all the answers on the slide. Well, what do you think the animals will feel in response to not getting enough food for a long period of time? Any ideas? Thoughts? What would you think?
Exhausted and lethargic.
Exhausted and lethargic. Yes, that
They'll stop ruminating.
stop ruminating. Yes, that's an interesting observation. Yeah, obviously there will, because the rumen needs a constant supply of food coming into it the whole time. From all we know about ruminant animals, the animal is trying to maintain that constant supply, a bit like, if any of you brew beer, I suspect you don't. Does anyone make wine or brew beer? I don't. If you did, you would be topping it up with a bit of sugar all the time, because those yeast, Saccharomyces, they need sugar, they need energy to grow all the time and produce that alcohol. But in the case of the ruminant animal, it needs a constant supply of food. So why are cattle crepuscular feeders? So they are feeding mainly at dawn and at dusk, what we call crepuscular feeders. They're crepuscular feeders because they don't like feeding at night. It's dangerous, there might be predators around, so they try and spread out their feeding to each ends of the lit day. So early in the morning and late at night they'll have a big feeding period. Now if your cattle tend to be corralled at night and they can't feed, then that's not good for the cattle, because that's when they're normally wanting to feed. And they want to maintain a constant flow of food into that rumen to keep those microorganisms going at maximum rate. So in really intensive production systems, intensive dairy production systems, then the organisation of the feeding is totally to try and keep the animal feeding all day. It's like a machine, really. So it takes in so much food. They will, because every time the animals get fed, they all go to the feed face. You've seen them do this? Have you seen them? When you feed cattle, they all rush up and they say, okay, I'll get some of that food. Even if there's ad libitum food in front of them all day, when you feed them, they still rush up. Why do they do that? Any ideas? I don't know scientifically. I have some ideas, but I've never tested it. Why don't they like? Why are they so keen to get fresh food? Any thoughts?
Probably as a mechanism to store if there is a depredation at some point in time.
Yeah, that's an interesting observation. Cattle, well, and sheep, they like to be testing. This is not the answer, but they like to be testing their food supplies all the time. It is dangerous to rely just on one food supply. So if you put sheep on a very diverse paddock, they will actually go and test all the different types of food on a fairly regular basis, every day. Okay, so I'm mainly eating clover, but I'll go and test this this other feed over here, just so that I know that it's still there in case the clover runs out. Yeah, so an interesting observation. But why do I've forgotten what I was asking now. What we
Why do cattle eat if you put up fresh feed?
Oh yeah, okay, thanks, President. Yes, good. Why do cattle always go to try and get fresh food? Any ideas? Well, I think they want it clean. They don't like chewing over, because when cattle take food in, they produce an enormous amount of saliva. How much saliva do you think a dairy cow produces every day?
More than 100 liters.
How many?
More than 100 liters.
More than 100. Wow, I didn't know it was quite that much. 180 litres. Any advance on 180? Well, the figure I have in mind was about 60 litres, but maybe a very high-yielding cow will do more than that. But it's still a huge amount. 60 litres is still a pretty large amount of saliva, and some of that saliva contaminates the feed whilst they're eating. And I suspect that other cattle don't like coming to take food that is contaminated with saliva, so they always want it fresh. And that's why in some really high-producing systems, they start feeding the cows 5 or 6 times a day, so that the cows will keep coming up to get more food, and they'll have a higher intake. And you get a higher milk yield, there's no doubt. So that's a useful way of doing that. We're digressing a little bit. What I'm supposed to be talking about is what are the emotional responses to shortage of food, prolonged shortage of food. What would you feel, first up, if you were short of food? It's getting towards lunchtime. What do you feel? Full? What do you feel? Hungry. Yes, you feel hungry. Well, exactly. It's fairly obvious that hunger is an emotion which has been devised to regulate appetite. Okay, to control the amount of food you eat. Maybe it doesn't work too well always, but it generally is. It's there, and there are a lot of hormones associated with the feeling of hunger. Does anyone know which those are? What hormones are associated with hunger?
Body stress.
Sometimes, but not usually. Yeah, not in ruminants. Definitely not in ruminants. Because I've looked several times at what happens when animals are transported and they're taken away from their food. No increase in cortisol as a result of being taken away from the food. Increase in cortisol as a result of transport, yes, but not deprivation of food. But I think it might be different in pigs and humans, possibly chickens as well, I don't know. So not so much the stress hormones. Leptin, ghrelin, yeah.
Glucagon.
Sorry? Glucagon, yes, for storage of, and insulin, of course, as well. All of those, and probably more, I'm sure there are more, associated with hunger. So hunger is the first emotion which the animals will feel, and it's a negative emotion. We don't like feeling hungry. Do they go on feeling hungry? Supposing we are starving cattle for 3 weeks. How long will they feel hungry for? 3 weeks? What do you think?
Much less than that.
Much less than that, yes.
It's similar to human hunger, for example.
Yeah.
I think the stomach starts contracting, so the amount of food actually increases.
Right, okay. Yes, you're absolutely right, Professor. The evidence we have is from humans. And I was thinking particularly of hunger strikers, people who say, right, I'm like Mahatma Gandhi, of course, was one of the most famous hunger strikers. But he probably only felt hungry for a few days after he started his fasts, I guess. Maybe someone asked him, I don't know. And we can imagine that the same is true with cattle, that it's only in the first initial period. Why Why do animals only feel hungry for a short period of time? You've given us a physiological explanation, Prasandeep, that the stomach contracts, but from an adaptive point of view, why wouldn't an animal be hungry, for a week? Because it might get more food. Think of how the animals, hunger is probably quite common in, say, it is quite common in wild animals that are out on the plains and you get some variation in climate. Shortage of food is quite common. Why is it not always associated with hunger? Well, hunger is stressful, okay? And we mentioned corticosteroids as a possibility. And those may or may not, those are not involved to any great extent, but apart from corticosteroids, there is a big stress response in the animal, regardless of whether it's mediated by cortisol. And that is associated with increased basal metabolic rate to try and find food, changes in the many aspects of the metabolism of the animal changes during that stress response, and it simply would not be adaptive for the animal to be stressed for a long period of time. And remember, I mentioned yesterday about Darwin saying that animals out on the plains, wild animals out on the plains, are not stressed by the presence of predators. The wildebeest grazing and the lion is 100 yards away. Who cares? Doesn't matter. It's not going to get me because I'm fit and healthy. I don't need to worry, and if I did worry, I wouldn't survive, because worry costs energy. That's the key thing. That stress response costs a lot of energy. So it's not advantageous for the animals to worry. So how does it proceed? So, okay, hunger makes the animal stressed, maybe not in that corticosteroid mediated fashion, but that leads to what we call pica, a depraved appetite. So the animal can't find food. It says, okay, I'll try everything around me to try and find food. There's some old bones here, I'll try those. Here's the carcass of a dead cow. I'll try eating its skin. And this may not happen in India. It happens in Australia because we get these big droughts and animals dying in the interior. And animals die not of undernutrition, they die of botulism because they are eating old bones. Is that a problem here in India? No? Okay. We have that problem, and that is why sometimes if you drive around Australia you can see large piles of cattle bones that are being brought out of a property onto beside the road, and the reason is they don't want those cattle bones to be present in the paddocks so that other animals might be chewing them. They would chew them not just to get food, but particularly to restore some nutrient deficiencies. Now, we may not get time to talk a lot about those, but anyone know which nutrients they'd be particularly trying to get in cattle bones? Phosphorus.
Sodium phosphorus.
Yes, yeah, particularly phosphorus. The bones full of calcium and phosphorus, and phosphorus deficiency is so common in rangeland animals. And one thing they'll do is try and eat bones, and they will presumably get small bits of bone which can go in the rumen and start to restore that phosphorus balance. Okay, so pica becomes a problem. If the animals still don't get energy, now here we're beginning to speculate. What I've said up to now is pretty well fact, but now we speculate, and this is partly because there's been very, very little research on animals that have been malnourished through to death. I can't imagine many university ethics committees would actually accept for you to do that sort of an experiment. So we get frustration, and then we get, yes, the lethargy. The animal, if it still can't find food, it becomes lethargic, and that's again of adaptive benefit. So the animal says, I can't find food anywhere, what do? I wait until food comes to me. I wait until the rains. I wait until the farmer brings some more food. So I shut down my body systems and wait. It's no good being stressed. I've used up much more energy. I need to shut down and become lethargic. But if food still doesn't come, of course, eventually the animal becomes exhausted and dies. So it's not a simple process. It's quite a complicated process. And understanding what the welfare implications are is really quite difficult, because we have no research from well, really from here on, I would say. We know quite a lot about hunger and the emotions associated with that. We know a little bit about whether undernourished animals are going into stress or not. As I say, the evidence of a classical stress response in terms that, say, Hans Selye described it back in the 1950s, that adaptive syndrome of fight or flight, that is unlikely to be the case in terms of cattle. Do you want to pop down here? Right. And from then on, we know very little. We don't know how long those periods are. We don't know what the emotional correlates are. And yeah, in going through this sort of sequence, I've been accused of saying, well, don't you think cows suffer during undernutrition? Well, of course they suffer. An animal that dies is obviously going to suffer on the way there, but it's not a simple process. It's a complex process going through probably this sort of sequence. But this is pure conjecture. This is pure theory. There's no real evidence. I will tell you a little bit about some research that I did some years ago from Cambridge Uni, which gives us a little bit of further information. So what can we identify in the cattle to demonstrate that they are undernourished? Well, first thing is we can look at their body condition, of course. Now, when I was going around Australia looking at these 50 properties, I came across, as I got close back to Brisbane, I came across this Queensland sale yard at Roma. And what we saw there was, because there had been a severe drought in the north of Australia at the time, a lot of cattle that really were pretty thin. These look thin to me. Do they look thin to you? Or I know a lot of your cattle are actually in pretty good condition. People look after them generally quite well, but I also know from my student that's been going around doing a study of goshalas that some of the cattle there are in quite poor condition. Well, in Australia, we would think of these as being in poor condition, and they shouldn't have been sold. So the farmer has left it too late to send them to the sale yard. So we look particularly, when condition scoring animals, we're looking at the amount of fat cover over the tubercocci, the pin bones here. We're looking at because this is a fat storage region in the cow. But if the fat cover gets to a very low level, we can't look at that anymore. We need to look over the ribs here to condition score the animal. In sheep, we would look more at the covering of the spinal cord here. And putting your fingers into the wall and looking at the fat cover there. It's a fairly imprecise measure, and the reason for that is because between breeds there's a lot of difference in where livestock store their fat. I talked earlier about the sheep storing fat in their tails in some breeds, the Awasi for instance. And in cattle, of course, all your Bos Indicus cattle, they have fat stores on their backs, so very different compared with, say, the European Hereford type cattle, which has a lot of subcutaneous fat. And that obviously will influence what you feel when you are palpating the skin of the cow. So it's a fairly imprecise science.
So is there any quantitative measure at all?
Yes, we can it is possible to measure subcutaneous fat with ultrasound, but it's a bit technical and can't be done like when you walk into a sale yard. Yeah, so it can easily be done. Okay, here are the same cattle again. Yeah, so I would be putting these cattle down at a condition score of about 1, so they're really down at baseline. It depends how you score the cattle. You can use a 1 to 5 scoring system, you can use a 0 to 5 scoring system, you can use a 1 to 9 scoring system. It depends. And are you going to score to whole units, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? Are you going to score to half units, 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, etc.? Are you going to go down to quarter scores? It depends on what your purpose is to some extent. If your purpose is for research, then you might go to quarter or half scores. If your purpose is going onto a farm for advisory purposes, you might be scoring at whole units. We just did a study in Bangladesh where we monitored the welfare of, I think it was 700 dairy cows in 70 dairies. And the student involved, sorry, staff member involved, was scoring the cows to whole units. So a crude welfare assessment. One concept which is relevant here is that animals have a standard reference weight and a critical live weight. So the standard reference weight is the weight of the animal with the skeleton fully developed and the empty carcass containing 25% fat. So 25% fat, that's fairly standard. I'm about 23% fat, a bit too much. I don't know what you all are when you measure it, but essentially it's a normal fleshed animal. I'm not obese. The same with farm animals. This will be about the normal fat percentage. And then we have the critical live weight, the weight at which an animal cannot walk, graze, or safely obtain drinking water. The critical live weight. So the animal's behaviour has been adversely affected. And we can say that in sheep, the critical live weight is about 2/3, not quite 2/3 of the standard reference weight. So when it goes below 2/3 of its normal weight, that's when things begin to get pretty bad. Okay. Any questions so far? Any further thoughts? Okay, let's talk about drought.
Sir, I have one question.
Yes.
When you talk about the scoring system, this is a physics book.
Right.
You say there are half scores and of course just numeric values. My question is, if there are half scores, if the whole entire assessment is not quantitative,
Yes.
how does one give this half scores?
Right, yes, that's another good question because reviewers of journal articles, when you submit papers, if they're pure statisticians or maybe physicists even, they might say, but your scale isn't linear. How can you take an average condition score? And I guess that's the difference between agricultural science and statistics or physics, maybe that, we're cutting corners. We're cutting corners. It's true that it's not a linear scale necessarily. That an animal in a score of 4 doesn't have twice as much fat to cover as an animal in a scale of 2. It is essentially a qualitative assessment method, but still we use quantitative methods to take averages, look at changes over time, because otherwise what would we do? We can't, it's cutting corners because it just is all we can do.
But isn't this relevant from the point of view of, let's say, putting products in the market where I say that animal welfare has not been compromised, and then these scores become very, very relevant? How do I know where the animal stands in the welfare scale?
Yes. Condition scoring is used mainly by advisors and researchers, I think, rather than farmers. Farmers will all say they know how well fresh their animals are. They don't need to measure it.
But when it comes to a population who wants to buy products,
Right.
I mean, like me,
Yes.
I would like to have a score which is now relevant.
Yes.
It should come out of the researcher's notebook and come to the label.
Yes. Yeah, you would have to pay for an ultrasound measurement then, and it could be expensive. You would pay 10% extra for your meat.
I was just wondering, like all the certifications like Red Tractor or RSPC
Yeah.
certifications do use a welfare assessment tool
Yes.
to do their own scoring based on which they provide certifications. But I'm not sure if anywhere around the world the exact scoring is marked on the product, or because either it is high welfare or it is not.
That's right.
So
There are a few places where it is a graded scale. You know, 1 is terrible welfare, 2 is reasonable welfare, 3 is very, very good welfare. It's becoming a little bit more complex. But for the most part it is, yes, this is improved welfare, this is just normal. And condition scoring is part of those assessments, the RSPCA assessment. One of the most common ones nowadays is the so-called welfare quality assessment, which was developed in Europe. You may have heard of that one. Sorry, you may have heard of that one. The welfare quality assessment has been utilised quite widely around the world. That is the one that's beginning to be standard around the world. And it includes condition score, and you take averages, you look at changes, as I say, we cut corners. But, you know, we're biological scientists, we're cutting corners the whole time. And it's a question of which corners are okay to cut. Some of you are veterinarians. Yeah? Okay. And you're probably steeped in epidemiology. And the pure epidemiologists sometimes have half a foot in the statistician's camp, and they say, but you cannot take averages of these scores, because my statistical training tells me that they're not linear, and you need to just say how many, okay, we're describing a population of cows, so we can have two options. These are the cows coming into the market. There's 20 cows coming into the market. Two options. I can go in and say, okay, the average score of these cows is 2.5, which is about okay, I think. Or I can go in as an epidemiologist and I can say, there are 4 cows which are score 1, there are 3 cows which are score 2, there are 8 cows which are score 3, and there are 10 cows that score 4. Which do you want me to do? I'll do either. If I'm a simple person going to the market, I might say, okay, I'm going to buy that pen of cows. I want to know their average condition score. But if I'm maybe only buying 1 or 2 cows, I say, okay, I'll pick out the ones that are a bit fatter than the other ones. So there's no right answer, I think. And it depends on your training. As we've seen, Prasenjit has a different approach from a physical background, I think. Veterinarians maybe a little bit in the middle. Some of you are agriculturalists. I'm an agriculturalist, so I cut a lot of corners.
But it can be done. For example, if you want to know the average response of the earth, we take earthquake and measure how the earth is moving around.
Yeah.
Earthquake, which is 8 on the Richter scale, it is much, much severe than what is 7.
Yeah.
So it's on log scale. So one can always devise a scale, whether it's a scale of 0.2 or a scale of 2 or a scale of 10.
Yes, yes.
I was just looking at the future of this thing.
Okay.
there are some professors at NDRI who have worked on body condition scoring for Indian cattle.
Right.
So I can bring a copy of the National Dairy Code. It has a copy of that scale that they have.
Yeah. The problem is that it's not. It's definitely not logarithmic, of course. It's not all. I should have said not that it's just not linear, but it's not ordered. You know, it really is qualitative, as you said. So Traditionally, I would say, okay, so some sort of rules of thumb that I have, well, we can't see it here, but to achieve a score of 4, a cow has to have a crease under the pin bone. That's something which I use, that's qualitative. To achieve a score of 1, there has to be no fat around the tubercoxy here. Okay. To achieve a score of 0, we've got to look at the ribs, and they've got to be very prominent like that. So those are just some guide points.
So that's in the scale of 0 to 5.
0 to 5, yes. Okay. Okay, let's talk about drought briefly. Okay, why is drought such a problem? Why can't farmers forecast drought and buy enough food for their cattle so that they can maintain them through any drought period? And it might seem like a simple problem. The variability in food supply is great, it's very significant. Buy some food, store it up. Well, stored food is expensive and the rats get to it, and it costs money to store. And farmers just don't think like that. They're not planning and forecasting in that way. They live much more for today, for the day, for tomorrow, not a year ahead, not 2 years ahead. You could say, well, the successful farmers are thinking ahead. Maybe they're the ones with the bigger bank reserves. So farmers are interesting people, and to understand their response to drought, I think you've really got to try and get inside their head and how they function. So drought may be a problem in the future, but it also might be a problem if cattle prices double, if food prices double, or if supplements become really expensive, or the milking machine breaks, or, I don't know, a whole range of different problems. Drought is only one of the problems they've got to deal with. And I think to understand the farmer's response, you have to experience what he's going through, or she's going through. And that's why I went and spent time on 50 farms in Australia. That's why I went and worked on a sheep farm for a year before I went to university, and a cattle farm, so that I could understand what's going on in the minds of the manager. And I think I probably learned more doing that sort of thing about how the farm is run compared with a lot of looking in the books afterwards when I was at university. So what can the farmer do then? Well, he can look at the forecast. We know that weather forecasts are improving every year. I forget the figures, but the 10-day forecasts are getting more and more accurate. And particularly if you're in a big continental mass where the weather is moving and changing quite slowly, then the forecasts are very accurate. In Australia, the east coast of Australia, prevailing winds, weather's coming across from the west, as they are in most parts of the world, then the forecasts are very accurate. The United Kingdom, when I used to live in the UK, forecasts were much less accurate because much more changeable weather patterns. It's come across the Atlantic, the weather's hitting land for the first time, and it's quite changeable. And in response to anticipated drought, so the farmer can purchase additional food, but that's always more expensive than feed which is out in the paddock, out in the cut and carry feed which farmers will use, the vegetable waste products, the byproducts, the residues are all cheaper forms of food. And so he hesitates to buy in large amounts of grain or hay because it's expensive. And he thinks, maybe those forecasts will tell me in a few days that rain is coming. Maybe the cattle will survive. Or the farmer can move his stock. Now that may not be so relevant here in India, I don't know. I don't know your farming systems well enough. But I know in Australia, in the north of Australia, we have big companies with huge farms. Some of them are the size of some of your states. Thousands, they're measured in square kilometres, our farms. And if you have a drought on one side of the country, then the company will move their cattle to the other side of the country where there isn't a drought, and that generally works quite well. So the big pastoral companies have the opportunity to move animals about, and that they do that to good effect. So yeah, moving stock is generally a good solution. Selling stock for slaughter, well, we've just seen how farmers leave that till the last minute. And then what stock do they sell in a dairy herd? Would they sell their breeding heifers? Would they sell their milking cows? Would they sell their calves? You know, if they sell their younger animals that are about to come into breeding, they're losing their future herd, which they've been protecting in terms of good genetics. They're losing all of that. If they sell their milking cows, they're losing their immediate source of income. It's a really difficult dilemma for the farmers, which animals to sell. Now obviously you'll say, well, you sell the old animals that aren't milking very well, but they may have been sold early on in the problem. It's very important, however, that the farmer knows his animals well. You know, identifies which animals are not milking well, which animals are in poor condition. So monitoring the stocks really important. Let's just return to undernutrition indicators for a minute. We have talked about body condition score and ultrasound fat measurements. There are some biochemical indicators. Now normally on a farm, of course, the farmer will not be taking blood samples to determine if his animals are undernourished, and indeed he only has to look at them generally to see if they're undernourished. But what he can look at in the case of disputes, he can look at some biochemical indicators, because, and I don't know if that happens in India, but in Western countries sometimes, you know, a tourist is travelling down the road and they see some very thin cattle in a paddock. They phone the RSPCA or you know, a shelter, and they say, I've just seen some really thin cattle. The RSPCA goes and impounds those cattle, takes them, and tries to prosecute the farmer because they're so thin, if some of them were close to death. And so you get a court case where one veterinarian usually will stand up and say, no, these cattle weren't thin, it was just normal. They lose weight every winter time when there's no rain and there's no feed around, and then they'll put it all on next spring. And another vet will say, well, actually, I think these cattle were too thin. They were down at condition score 0.5. What you need in those circumstances is biochemical indicators. And we did some work some years ago looking at two particular indicators, albumin in particular and fructosamine. Albumin is the main blood protein and is particularly responsive to protein supply in the feed, because what the animal is very often short of is protein, high quality protein feeds. Expensive, and that's most likely to be deficient. And if we combine that with a measure of body condition score and fructosamine, which is a hormone that starts to be produced when the animal is actually digesting its own muscle tissue. It's utilizing muscle tissue to produce energy, fructosamine. When we combine that little suite of measures, and if it's less than, if albumin is less than 31.5 grams per litre, body condition score less than 1, and you have a high fructosamine level, we could get almost 100% detection of cattle that were going to die. So we took the blood of cattle that had died and compared it with the blood of cattle that were reasonably well nourished, and we could get pretty well 100% detection of the very thin cattle that were going to die, and almost no false positives. So it was quite a useful detection measure in those extreme cases. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say really about long-term starvation of animals. Does anyone have any questions about that? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So, can this albumin structure, so can it use it readily can we use it as a painkiller?
just like you said that it can be still using very extreme cases. So usually we see that milk power, the people walls that we have found continually. So what is the purpose of this ultrasound?
Yeah.
Is it under critical conditions only we can go
Critical, that's right. This is beyond ketone bodies, it's beyond beta hydroxybutyrate. It's when there is no more production of ketone bodies and no digestion of the animal's reserves to produce beta hydroxybutyrate, when the animal is literally close to death.
In the case malnutrition or undernutrition? We said that malnutrition and nutrition is a difference.
Different, yes. Well, I haven't really come on to malnutrition yet, but I'm thinking of undernutrition, but it is often associated with malnutrition because the severely undernourished animal goes and looks for different types of food and often takes in the wrong type of food. So yes, this is what I was referring to with those biochemical indicators were extreme cases. Wouldn't help you, going into the field and looking for thin cows. Looking for very, very, very thin cows, yes, it would be useful there. We did do a follow-up experiment in South Africa with less thin cows, and it didn't work as well. The albumin in itself was not bad at detecting thin cattle, but not quite as effective as we saw with the very thin cows. Okay, inhabitant sheep. So I want now just to talk a little bit about animals that are temporarily restricted from food, particularly transported animals. How are we doing for time, that question, did you?
We are at 2, so we can break for lunch.
Okay, yeah, we can, yes.
Somewhere.
Yes, I've been going too slowly, so I'll speed up. Okay, yeah, let's break for lunch. How long do we have for lunch?
I think 20 minutes.
20 minutes, okay, go for it. Oh, we'll all be hungry. We don't want that. And stressed. And lethargic. Go for lunch. We don't want that. Exhausted even. Good. Let's break for 20 minutes.
This is what we're trying out today, that Ms. Khushbu Gupta is going to translate a summary in Hindi for people who would, not for this lecture per se, but in future, we'll have somebody translating a summary of the proceedings in Hindi. So, can we try that?
Yeah, I was thinking if those who are comfortable, those who want to proceed for lunch can do that. And those who really want to, because I won't be doing the true translation, but just a gist of what happened in the first time. So those who want to learn in Hindi, they can just sit and we can sit in a small room and I can go through the slides.
Okay, pass slide.
Yeah, just maybe one slide each and say this is what he said and this is what.
So I think you should focus the cameras on that because this is we're trying out a new way of bilingual translation. So this is the first trial for a bilingual translation, and later on what we'll do, we'll have a Hindi translator who will do it continuously together with the slides. But that's what we do. For others who do not want this, we can have that.
Do you want the slides here?
Yeah.
There's not much on the early ones.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah. भी फ्लो नहीं आ पाता है ना। तो बेसिकली जब हम फार्म एनिमल्स के बारे में बात करते हैं और उनके पोषण के बारे में बात करते हैं तो उसमें क्या क्या की पॉइंट्स जो हैं जो हमें ध्यान देने के लिए। तो ये कुछ स्लाइड के बारे में मैं थी नहीं सामने, तो मैं जहाँ से थी मैं वहाँ से बात करूँगी, लेकिन मैं एक बार पढ़ के आपको ठीक है, मैं एक बार पढ़ के देख लेती हूँ। अच्छा, इन्होंने बताया कि क्या क्या न्यूट्रिशन प्रॉब्लम्स जो कि न्यूट्रिशन रिलेटेड प्रॉब्लम होती है उसमें क्या क्या बात करेंगे। तो सबसे पहले अंडर न्यूट्रिशन, जो न्यूट्रिशन है वो कम पोषण है उसका क्या मतलब होता है। दूसरा शॉर्ट टर्म फीड रिस्ट्रिक्शन, जैसे होता है कभी कभी जैसे हम लोगों को एक टेस्ट के लिए जाना है तो हमें क्या कहते हैं, या ऑपरेशन कहते हैं कि 24 घंटे तक कुछ मत खाना, 48 घंटे तक कुछ मत खाना। तो शॉर्ट टर्म फीड रिस्ट्रिक्शन मतलब एक छोटे समय के लिए, डिफाइंड टाइम के लिए जब आपने खाने को बंद किया है। मालन्यूट्रिशन जो होता है कुपोषण, ये कुपोषण के बारे में। टॉक्सिक एजेंट्स एंड पोल्यूटेंट्स, एक होता है न्यूट्रिशन में सबसे पहले ये भी प्रॉब्लम होती है कभी कभी कैसे रहता है कि जो आप खा रहे, आपके पास खाना है लेकिन जो खा रहे हैं उसका क्वालिटी खराब है ना, टॉक्सिक एजेंट है या पोल्यूटेंट्स है उसके अंदर। और फ्यूचर ट्रेंड्स, न्यूट्रिशन में फ्यूचर ट्रेंड्स में कि फ्यूचर में न्यूट्रिशन से रिलेटेड जो बातें पूरी दुनिया में हो रही है उसके बारे में। तो उन्होंने अंडर न्यूट्रिशन को डिफाइन किया है कि जो है अंडर न्यूट्रिशन को क्या कहेंगे, अंडर न्यूट्रिशन जैसे जो न्यूट्रिशन जो कि कम है, मतलब कुछ मिल रहा है लेकिन वो पूरा पोषक तत्व उसमें उसमें कम है। तो इसमें लिखा है a prolonged inadequate supply of nutrients to sustain good health, and in the case of immature and underweight animals, growth potential where prolonged implies that a steady state has been reached. तो इसमें लिखा है कि एक लंबे समय तक है ना, एक जो कि एक अच्छे स्वास्थ्य के लिए जरूरी है, जब वो नहीं चाहती है तो उसमें इमेच्योर अंडरवेट एनिमल की जो ग्रोथ पोटेंशियल है, मतलब उससे क्या होता है कि आपकी ग्रोथ रुक जाती है। जैसे क्या होता है इंसानों में भी जो लोग जिनको ज़्यादा पोषक खाना नहीं मिलता, मालनरिश्ड होते हैं या जो भी खाना है लेकिन वो इतना क्या होता है खाना खा रहे हैं लेकिन ताकत नहीं मिल रही है, हेल्दी नहीं, तो उससे क्या होता है कि उससे जो है ग्रोथ रुक जाती है। ठीक है, फिर उसके बाद मोस्ट कॉमन वेलफेयर प्रॉब्लम्स फॉर रेंज लैंड लाइवस्टॉक। फिर उन्होंने, मैं इस स्लाइड पे आई थी तो उन्होंने इस बारे में बात की है कि जो रेंज लैंड में है, अब ये रेंज लैंड मेरे ख्याल से इनका मतलब है कि जो बहुत बड़ी तादाद में जो पशु रखे जाते हैं एक जगह पे, तो उसमें गौशाला वगैरह हो गया, ग्रेजिंग लैंड हो गया जहाँ पे बहुत मात्रा में रखे जाते हैं। तो ये एक एग्जाम्पल था जो कि मैंने नहीं किया, तो शायद आप बता सकते हैं। हंगर, स्ट्रेस, पाइका, फ्रस्ट्रेशन, लेथार्जी, पाइका एक बीमारी होती है, पाइका एक बीमारी होती है, तो उसके ऊपर इलैबोरेट भी कर सकते हैं, उनसे पूछ सकते हैं कि इस कॉन्टेक्स्ट में उन्होंने कैसे यूज किया है और ये न्यूट्रिशन से रिलेटेड होती है। फिर इन्होंने ये दिया था क्वींसलैंड का सेल यार्ड का एग्जाम्पल दिया था। अब सेल यार्ड में एग्जैक्टली क्या होता है, इन्होंने बताया कि फार्मर्स ने इन पशुओं को छोड़ दिया है और ये बेचने के लिए यहाँ पे रखे गए हैं। लेकिन हमारे यहाँ पे क्या है, अगर इंडिया के हिसाब से आप देखेंगे तो शायद कहेंगे कि पशु ठीक दिख रहे हैं, कोई दिक्कत नहीं है, लेकिन वहाँ का जो पशु कल्याण का स्टैंडर्ड है, एक पैमाना है वहाँ का, वो बहुत अच्छा है ना। तो उसके हिसाब से इन पशुओं की जो हालत है, इनके शरीर की हालत है, वो बहुत ख़राब है। और जो खराब पशु भी है वो इस तरीके से नहीं बेचा जाना चाहिए। और किसानों ने इनको अपने झुंड में से बाहर करने के लिए, झुंड में बाहर करने के लिए बहुत ज़्यादा समय लगा दिया। तो वो ये बता रहे थे कि बहुत सारी ऐसे टेक्निक और ऐसे मेथड होते हैं जिसमें से एक कहते हैं बॉडी कंडीशनिंग स्कोरिंग। तो बॉडी कंडीशन क्या है, बॉडी के जानवर का जो शरीर है उसका कंडीशन, उसकी क्या सिचुएशन है, उसकी कंडीशन को
के आधार पे,
उसकी कंडीशन के हिसाब से आप स्कोरिंग करते हैं। तो ये स्कोरिंग अलग अलग प्रकार से होती है, या तो 0 से 5 के स्केल पे आप कर सकते हैं या 1 से 5 के स्केल पे कर सकते हैं। कुछ लोग क्या करते हैं कि जैसे आपने किसी एक गाय को देखा,
उसमें बॉडी कंडीशन स्कोरिंग में ना काफ़ी चीज़ें होती हैं, जैसे कि क्या उसकी रिब्स दिख रही हैं। कुपोषण के बहुत सारे इंडिकेटर्स होते हैं ना, फिजिकल इंडिकेटर्स जिनको कहते हैं, जैसे कि अगर इसकी रिब्स दिख रही हैं या उसकी खाल पे मांस कितना है कितना नहीं है, टेल बोन जो है पीछे से जो होता है टेल बोन का क्या सिचुएशन है, या उसकी स्पाइनल कॉर्ड पे क्या है, क्या आप उसको जब पकड़ते हैं तो कितना मांस आपके दिखता है या नहीं। तो ये सेट स्केल है। यूजुअली दुनिया में जितनी भी मतलब बॉडी कंडीशन स्कोर के ऊपर जो भी रिसर्च है या पेपर पब्लिश हुए हैं, उसमें मेनली उन्होंने, क्योंकि बाहर काम हुआ है तो बाहर की ब्रीड्स के हिसाब से हुआ है, यहाँ की ब्रीड्स के हिसाब से नहीं है। तो मैं ये बता रही थी कि नेशनल डेयरी रिसर्च इंस्टीट्यूट में कुछ प्रोफेसर्स ने काम किया है, जिसमें उन्होंने इंडिया की जो गाय है उसके हिसाब से उसका क्या स्कोरिंग होना चाहिए। लेकिन अगर जैसे आप पशुओं के साथ रहते हैं या उनके साथ काम करते हैं तो आप खुद ही बता देंगे देख के, है ना। तो ज़्यादा पतला भी बुरा होता है और ज़्यादा मोटा भी बुरा होता है। हाँ, मीडियम होना चाहिए, बिल्कुल। तो उसके बारे में वो बात कर रहे थे। फिर जैसे यहाँ सेल यार्ड में वो बता रहे थे कि कैसे इनकी किसी की जो है ये इस गाय के बारे में उन्होंने बताया था कि पीछे जो टेल बोन है ये बहुत ज़्यादा दिख रही है, तो इसका मतलब इसका जो बॉडी कंडीशन स्कोर है वो बहुत ख़राब है, ठीक है। हाँ, तो इसके बारे में बात कर रहे थे ना वो इस गाय के बारे में। फिर उसके बाद स्टैंडर्ड एंड क्रिटिकल वेट मेजर्स, स्टैंडर्ड एंड क्रिटिकल वेट्स, तो उन्होंने इसके बारे में बताया था कि आप किस तरीके से जैसे एक तरीका होता है कि पता करने के लिए कि वो जो है उसका न्यूट्रिशन ठीक है या नहीं है, वो ये होता है कि एक होता है स्टैंडर्ड वेट होता है किसी भी इंसान का या किसी भी लिविंग बीइंग का। तो उसमें क्या होता है कि जो पशु का वेट है अपना, उस पशु के वेट में जैसे कि आप जब हड्डियां निकाल देंगे तो 25% अगर फैट है तो वो माना जाता है कि वो एक ठीक है कि ये पशु ठीक है। बाकी क्रिटिकल वेट क्या होता है, जहाँ पे क्रिटिकल लाइव वेट, जहाँ पे जो पशु है वो ना चल सकता है, ना खा सकता है, ना पानी पी सकता है प्रॉपरली, कि पानी पिएगा तो उसको चाटना पड़ता है ना पानी को, क्या वो पानी में गिर जाएगा या कुछ है, कि सेफली वो पानी ले सकता है या नहीं ले सकता। फिर उन्होंने शीप के बारे में बताया था, और क्योंकि कुछ जैसे वो बता रहे थे कि कुछ ब्रीड्स में क्या होता है कि गाय के तो जैसे पूरे शरीर पे आपको फैट दिखता है, शीप की कुछ ऐसी ब्रीड होती हैं जिसमें वो अपनी पूंछ में अपना फैट स्टोर करती हैं। लेकिन हो सकता है कि अगर उस ब्रीड की वो उसकी व्यवहार ही ऐसा है कि वो अपना पूंछ में करती है और वैसे उसका शरीर पतला रहता है, तो कोई देखने वाला क्या कहेगा कि नहीं ये तो कमज़ोर है ना। लेकिन अगर हम स्टैंडर्ड रेफरेंस वेट के हिसाब से उसका कैलकुलेशन करेंगे तो शायद वो ठीक निकले। तो ये साइंटिफिक तरीके हैं किस तरीके से हम देख सकते हैं कि उनका न्यूट्रिशन ठीक है या नहीं है, ठीक है, और उनकी हेल्थ कैसी है। फिर उन्होंने ड्राउट के बारे में, ड्राउट क्या होता है, सूखा, है ना, तो सूखे में कैसे मैनेज करना चाहिए। तो उन्होंने डिफरेंट ये पॉइंट्स इस स्लाइड पे डाले हैं, जिसमें उन्होंने कहा है कि जैसे कि प्लानिंग एंड फोरकास्टिंग। कभी कभी हम क्या कहते हैं कि अभी किसान जो है किसान जब पता है कि सूखा आने वाला है, वो कह रहे थे कि आजकल क्या होता है कि पहले तो क्या था कि पता नहीं कि आज बारिश कल धूप या कुछ, लेकिन आजकल मौसम विभाग जो है वो थोड़ा एक्यूरेट है। पहले तो कहते थे ना मौसम विभाग कह रहा है तो ऐसा नहीं होगा, ऐसे कहते थे ना हम लोग, अब तो पहले से पता चल जाता है और वो एक्यूरेट भी हो जाता है। तो उसी के संदर्भ में उन्होंने ये बोला था कि अब क्योंकि किसानों को इस तरह की चीज़ें इस्तेमाल करनी चाहिए, फोरकास्टिंग के हिसाब से देखना चाहिए कि अब हमें आगे क्या करना है। बहुत सारे जो छोटे किसान होते हैं वो यूजुअली या जो प्राइमरीली अपना डेयरी का नहीं करते हैं, तो वो क्या करते हैं, वो इस पे ज़्यादा ध्यान नहीं देते हैं। लेकिन आजकल बहुत से किसान मॉडर्न टेक्नोलॉजी को कर रहे हैं और यूज़ कर रहे हैं, और वो लोग इन सब चीज़ों का इस्तेमाल कर रहे हैं और वो प्लान कर सकते हैं। बाकी उन्होंने कहा था परचेजिंग एडिशनल फीड। लोग कहते हैं कि सूखा पड़ेगा, अरे ज़्यादा खाना खरीद के रख लो और फिर दे दो। लेकिन कभी कभी क्या होता है कि ज़्यादा खाना खरीदने से उसको स्टोर करना पड़ेगा, खाना आप ढंग से स्टोर नहीं करोगे तो आपके पास ज़्यादा खाना है, फिर भी आप उनको नहीं दे पाओगे तो क्या फ़ायदा, चूहे आ जाएंगे, ख़राब हो जाएगा। तो परचेजिंग एडिशनल फीड एक ऑप्शन है, लेकिन शायद हमेशा नहीं है, ठीक है। फिर उसके बाद मूविंग स्टॉक टू एरियाज विद बेटर फूड सप्लाईज। उन्होंने बताया कि बाहर के कुछ देशों में क्या होता है, जैसे ऑस्ट्रेलिया में क्या होता है कि जैसे एक हिस्से में सूखा है ना, तो वो क्या करते हैं अपने पूरे के पूरे कोहर्ट को वहाँ पे ले जाते हैं। हाँ, जो हमारे नोमैडिक ट्राइब्स होते हैं, पैस्टोरल ट्राइब्स होती हैं, हाँ जी, हाँ जैसे राजस्थान से काफ़ी सारे आते हैं या कुछ है, लेकिन वो फिर भी बहुत छोटे हैं। वहाँ तो एकदम हज़ारों की तादाद के बड़े बड़े हर्ड्स होते हैं जो कि कंपनी के अपने फार्म होते हैं, तो वो लोग उनको ट्रांसपोर्ट कर देते हैं। यहाँ पे तो जो एक नोमैडिक जो है वो एक अलग कॉन्सेप्ट है, ये सिर्फ कमर्शियल डेयरी के पर्पज से है, ठीक है। तो मूविंग स्टॉक टू अदर प्लेसेस, फिर सेलिंग स्टॉक फॉर स्लॉटर। जैसे कुछ होता है कि वो कह रहे थे कि कभी कभी क्या रहता है कि ये सेलिंग फॉर स्टॉक फॉर स्लॉटर और स्टॉक मॉनिटरिंग दोनों पॉइंट्स रिलेटेड हैं। जैसे कि एक किसान को अगर अपने हर्ड के बारे में पता है तो उनको पता रहेगा कि अच्छा अब अगर मेरे पास खाना कम है तो मैं किसको हटा सकता हूँ, है ना, छटाई करना जानवरों की, कि किसको मैं हटा सकता हूँ किसको नहीं कर सकता। तो वो एक ऑप्शन हो सकता है कि आप जिनको नहीं कर सकते, जैसे बहुत बार क्या होता है कि जहाँ पे बाढ़ है, स्पेशली सूखा जहाँ पे होता है, जैसे बीड़ वगैरह में आया था कुछ साल पहले, तो वहाँ पे जो बहुत पतले जानवर होते हैं या जो लगता है कि जो नहीं निकाल पाएंगे ये जो टाइम है, तो उनको फिर बेच दिया जाता है। उसको डिस्ट्रेस सेल कहते हैं मेरे ख्याल से यहाँ ना हम लोग। तो अंडर न्यूट्रिशन इंडिकेटर्स की जो कुपोषण तो माल न्यूट्रिशन हो गया, ये अंडर न्यूट्रिशन की जो कम न्यूट्रिशन है उनका, उसके इंडिकेटर हैं बॉडी कंडीशन स्कोर। हमने देखा कि 1 से 5 तक का जो स्कोर है या 0 to 5 का। फिर अल्ट्रासाउंड करके भी आप फैट मेजर कर सकते हैं कि फैट कैसा है। फिर बायोकेमिकल इंडिकेटर्स होते हैं जिसमें कि कुछ टेस्ट किए जाते हैं, ब्लड टेस्ट। ये एल्ब्यूमिन और फ्रुक्टोसेमिन, उन्होंने बताया कि ये दोनों एक एल्ब्यूमिन होता है जो मेन ब्लड प्रोटीन होता है, और ये जो फ्रुक्टोसेमाइन होता है ये भी एक ब्लड का जो है कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट है, जिसके मेजर से पता चल जाता है कि वो कितना उसमें एनिमल की कंडीशन क्या है। तो उसमें क्या करते हैं कि एक जानवर जो कि बिल्कुल ही मरने की या मर चुका है या मरने की हालत में, उसका क्या रे है, उसका रेफरेंस वैल्यू लेते हैं, और ये जो करंट जानवर है उसका जो है हाँ डिफरेंट है वो करके लेते हैं, ठीक है। फिर बस इतना अभी तक आया है और इसके बाद हम लोग शुरू करेंगे, ठीक है। हाँ ओके, नो प्रॉब्लम। हाँ जी।
interesting is that body condition score is a risk factor. Now, how does that work? Because actually it's the fat sheep which stop eating. Anyone any ideas about why that should be? Wouldn't it be your thin sheep that are dying? But it's the fat sheep that die when on the ships. Why is that? Probably the vets amongst you will have an idea. At least. Come in. Well, yeah, and heat stress more than heat. No, I don't think it is that, but that's a good idea. The problem is that the fat sheep are used to mobilizing, the thin sheep are used to mobilizing their body tissue. They are utilizing body tissue to maintain their energy supply. The fat sheep are not geared up to mobilizing body tissue. So they have become fat through the autumn period in Australia. There's lots of grass around. The thin sheep have been surviving on very little grass, and they've been losing. Sheep will survive because they continue to lose body condition. They're mobilizing body tissue. The fat sheep don't, and they're the ones that die. Okay. Let's talk about some other short-term feed restrictions, mainly associated with transport. In Australia, we have a max. Cattle and sheep are allowed not to be on water, in other words, not to have water in front of them, and that is 48 hours. So that is from the time that the animals are collected together in the paddock, in the fields, until the time that they arrive onto the ship and they get water. No more than 48 hours. That can be difficult because to drive from the northeast of Australia to the southwest, where the sheep all leave from, that is 50, 55 hours. And it probably takes a day to muster them in the paddock. So why is it a time off water, not a time off food? And I even question what is right. I think it should be a time off food, not time off water. But the argument is, of course, that livestock will die quite quickly if they don't have water. If they don't have food, they will still keep living for a period of time, probably a week to 2 weeks at least. If they don't have water, they'll probably die within less than a week. The impact of time off water is that the animals inevitably start to feel hungry, so there's a welfare impact there. But what is crucially happening is in the rumen that the microbes start to die. All those commensal microorganisms, the ones that are the good microorganisms, they start to die. And this means that the enteropathogenic bacteria, the bad bacteria like E. coli, they can start to proliferate in the rumen, potentially dangerous and potentially contaminating the carcass when those animals are killed. Of course, as well, we have utilization of body reserves. The non-esterified fatty acids will be liberated from the adipose stores, but usually not enough to maintain energy supply, and so the animals lose weight, 10 to 15%. It's useful to look at what the animals do when they eventually arrive at a situation where they can feed, drink, and lie down. If they go and lie down straight away, it means they're very tired, and probably the animals have been moving around a lot on the trucks. If they go and drink straight away, it means they're dehydrated. One of the reasons that I think time off water is not so important is because they can rehydrate themselves very quickly. You know, they can drink enough water in 5 minutes to rehydrate their body. How can we test for dehydration? Skin folds, skin tenting, yes. Pinch the skin and see how quickly it goes back down. sunken eyes. Yes, yes, that's good. Okay, so looking at what they do when they recover. Here's just some results of depriving sheep of access to feed and water for 12 hours. These are the triangles here. For 30 hours, these are the squares. And for 48 hours, these are the circles down the bottom. So here are the sheep at the beginning, before the start of the journey. They're about 45 kilos. And after the start of the journey, the ones that are deprived for... sorry, this is the transport period. And at the end of the transport period, they've lost quite a lot of weight, particularly the ones that are deprived for 48 hours. And what you'll notice is that the recovery is incomplete in the ones that were transported for 48 hours. So they never get back their full body weight. So they've lost body tissue, they've lost gut contents. Whereas the animals that are transported for 12 or 30 hours, they do recover most of their body weight. So they can recover fairly quickly. And again, that is indicative of in those most severely deprived animals. Again, it's showing lack of water supply to the animals. However, when you look at the conclusions of the scientists that did this work, their conclusions were that healthy adult sheep transported under good conditions can tolerate transport of up to 48 hours without undue compromise to their welfare. I put this up just as a caveat, just be careful, because yes, the results are clearly described, the results are there, and how they did the work, but then these people were being paid by the livestock industry, and so they put up the message that the livestock industry wants to hear. There's no problem with 48 hours of transport. And you look at the results, yes, there is a problem. There are welfare problems. So just a sort of message about the ethics of doing research, watch out for some of the conclusions of the scientists. Calf transport. Now this will not be so relevant for you here in India because you don't kill your calves, buffalo calves maybe, but in Australia we kill calves at 1 week of age. Huge numbers. In New Zealand, 2 million calves a year are killed because they're male and because they're only 1 week of age, and they're not wanted for meat. And the same in Australia. I don't know the numbers in Australia, but still pretty high. And here it provides us with some evidence. How quickly do calves begin to feel hungry? And the research evidence is that these animals would normally feed from their mothers about 5 or 6 times a day. Come in. Normally feed from their mothers 5 or 6 times a day. If they're not allowed to do that, if they're transported somewhere, then they will start to feel hungry. And we can use blood glucose evidence to tell us about that. So if we look at plasma glucose, and this is quite a good indicator of hunger. We know from research with humans that the blood glucose parallels the feelings of hunger quite well. And we can see that the number of hours since the last feed, blood glucose initially goes up, and then it begins to come down as time since the last feed extends. And after about 15 hours, then it begins to go down very suddenly. So the animal is starting to feel very hungry after about 15 hours. It's starting to feel hungry even when it's beginning to drop off here at about 9 or 10 hours. So we can use information like that to tell us about what the animal is feeling. And yet again, though, the same scientists actually concluded, based on our data and those of a similar New Zealand study, 30 hours with good practice in other aspects of calf management and transport is defensible as an outer legal limit for the time off feed for bobby calves. So those scientists were saying 30 hours is fine, but the blood glucose data is telling us those animals are feeling very hungry indeed. So how long is it acceptable to transport calves? Well, how long is a piece of string? In Switzerland, a very small country, the maximum time that calves can be transported is 6 hours. In Australia, and this is why that research was done, which I just told you about, the proposed maximum time is 30 hours. The current time is 24 hours. It's somewhat inconvenient for the livestock, for the people driving the trucks who pick up the calves, because they want to go from farm to farm picking up a few calves at each, and eventually they go to the meat works, to the abattoir. And if the time limit is 30 hours, they can go to lots of farms, 2 or 3 calves at each. If it's only 24 hours, they can't go to as many farms, they don't make as much money. And so in Australia it's proposed to be 30 hours, and we saw the research which supposedly justifies that. But the other point I'd make is that it depends on where you live. Australia is a big place. You know, it takes 30 hours or more to drive from one side of the country to the other. And whereas Switzerland's a very small place. So this is legislation of convenience. It's almost impossible to spend longer than 6 hours driving in Switzerland and not leave the country. Whereas in Australia, of course, you can do that. So, okay, malnutrition. We've talked about undernutrition. Malnutrition is a deficit. Thank you. We're talking about time off water, passengers. And thank you for rescuing my. Yes, thank you. Right, I cannot withstand 1 hour without water. Okay, so malnutrition. This is a deficit, an imbalance, or an excess of nutrients with adverse effects on the functioning of the animal, including behavior, physiology, reproduction, health, or growth potential. So it is feeding the animal wrongly, but it's affecting the functioning of the animal. And we'll have a look at a few instances of that. In the dairy cow, we know that there are many reasons why the animals are fed wrongly. Most importantly, in the high-yielding dairy cow, there's a conflict. There's a fight between the cow's genetic predisposition to produce high yields of milk versus her ability to get all that energy in. Because grass, you know, we said the cow was designed to consume low-quality forage. She was designed to harvest it all and then ruminate on it over long periods of time. She's got that big rumen to store all the feed, the low-quality feed, and digest it very slowly, a lot of it at night. And yet, we bred the dairy cow so that she is very productive, potentially, especially these Holstein cows that we see here, and which are coming into your country and have been for 50 or 60 years, or perhaps a bit more, to try and increase the milk production potential of the cows here. And this is a bit like, you know, bringing in a Ferrari to drive around in, rather than just an ordinary, I forget what a normal cars are, Morris Oxfords or something. It's a very high-performing sports car, the Friesian dairy cow. And if you look at her energy utilization, it's absolutely enormous. Someone who's compared the energy utilization across mammals has suggested that it's the highest of any mammal. So is that a question or a scratch? Question? No. Okay, it's a scratch. Right. Okay, so a prominent veterinarian, John Webster, in the Bristol Vet Schools, did some calculations and said that the only person who works as hard as the dairy cow is the human female when she is producing babies year after year after year and lactating every year. So the dairy cow just gets worn out in about 2 to 3 years in Western production systems. She will either stop reproducing, she'll become lame, or she may get mastitis. So there's a really serious physiological problem here that we've bred an animal that is not able to survive very long. Normal lifespan of the cow, about 25 years. The cows we talked about, Boscaris cattle, a good quality beef animal could last 25 years. But the dairy cow with the very high output of milk, that athlete of an animal, she's working really, really hard. She can only survive, on average, there are some, and there are some parts of the world where the dairy cows only last 2 lactations on average, and then they're killed, which I think is terrible. And that would be Holland, one of the most intensive dairying industries in the world, and the animal is just wasted, essentially. Your cows, I'm sure, last longer than 2 years of age. They might live, some of them, to 15, 20 years of age. So there is a problem with that. She gets too thin because she cannot take in enough food. John Webster, the veterinarian I was telling you about, has also speculated that these cows are permanently hungry. Why does he say they're permanently hungry? Because they've got food in front of them all the time, and yet they're becoming thinner and thinner. They're becoming anorexic. And it's almost like they're anorexic. They've got food in front of them, but they're very, very thin. And that's a bad situation. It leads to a lot of what we call metabolic diseases, metabolic disorders, because the metabolism of the cow cannot provide enough energy to produce the milk. And she hasn't got enough body fat reserves. She'll lose 60 to 80 kilograms in the first 6 weeks or so of lactation. A huge amount of body weight will flood off her to try and sustain that milk yield, which we bred her for. But in addition to that, she may get, if we feed her too concentrated a diet to provide that energy, she might get acidosis, which is acidic conditions in the rumen because the concentrates, the cereals, are digested too quickly by the bacteria. You get volatile fatty acids accumulating, and those acidic conditions predispose the cow to this problem, laminitis. And at some time I'll talk more about laminitis and that link. Acetonemia, the ketone bodies which were mentioned earlier, as the cow uses her body reserves very intensively to generate energy. Fatty liver disease, because the circulating fatty tissue, as she tries to mobilize her body fats and use them to provide energy, some of it gets trapped in the liver, and the liver then stops functioning properly. Fatty liver disease associated with reproductive failure. And what's she thinking about all this? We don't know. We haven't a clue, but pretty likely that she's not feeling good, I would suspect. But no one, well, no one has really measured it. People have measured cows' emotions when their calves are taken off them. They're not good. That's fairly recent research. We used to think, because cortisol wasn't greatly increased when the calf is removed from the cow, that that process was fine. But But we now know, through some new research which has been done, that the cow is not feeling good when a calf is taken from her. Okay. We'll skip that. This is just about behaviour responses. Okay. So there's been a huge amount of research on dairy cows in the last close on 100 years, really. One of the most well-researched animals. The fundamentals of a lot of statistics were worked out on dairy cow changeover trials. The Latin square was developed based on dairy cow research, changing a cow from one diet to another diet to another diet. It was all worked out with dairy cows. So we know a lot about the physiological and production effects. We know very little about the welfare impact. And if you think about subclinical disease, we know nothing. If you think of a common problem in the dairy cow, hypocalcemia or milk fever. So something like 1 or 2% of cows have real problems because they cannot mobilize enough calcium when they start lactating. So they get milk fever, they essentially collapse. And if that's happening to 1 or 2% of the cows, it's very likely that 10% of the cows or thereabouts will be having subclinical disease. So subclinical means we can't see it. There's no disease problem as such. But what is happening to the cow up here as she's so short of calcium, we don't know. Not well understood. Just while we're considering nutrition and animal welfare, a few words about feeding behaviour problems. You may have heard of stereotype behaviours. Some of you will be aware of those. These are behaviours that are repeatedly performed. Sorry?
Repeated again and again.
Yes. Yes. Do we know what it is in Hindi, just to translate this stage? Okay. Just so that our friends know.
कभी होता है ना एक ही चीज को बार-बार करना, तो stereotypical behavior इसके बारे में.
Okay. Stereotype behaviors indicate that something is wrong for the animal, and they're usually one of 2 or 3 types. They may be feeding related, or they may be locomotion related. So when we've domesticated animals, we've brought them into a small space usually. We stop them performing their normal behavior, their normal walking behavior. One of the animals in which this is most clear is the polar bear. If we put the polar bear into a small exhibit in a zoo, they start pacing all around the enclosure all the time. The reason being, polar bears in the Arctic, they walk very long distances, they have to. Well, the same thing for our cattle, but not quite so extreme. We are changing their diet so much that we make them perform abnormal behaviors. So we are intensifying their diet. We feed them something like this, which is very highly concentrated grass. They were supposed to be eating very coarse fibers and digesting them slowly. And the end result is feeding behavior problems. It may be tongue rolling in cattle here. We see this cow is extending her tongue, repeatedly rolling it all the time. Has anyone seen that in cattle? Yeah? Okay, some of you have seen that. The reason they do that is because these animals were designed to take about 60,000 bites of grass every day. It may seem an awful lot. The cow is grazing for 8 to 10 hours a day. She's biting at about 60 or 70 bites per minute. That's a lot of bites every day. If we stop her doing that by making her eat a concentrated diet without adequate fiber, this is what happens. She starts rolling her tongue around. It's telling us that something is wrong with the diet. the cows have other problems with their food as well. Feed tossing behaviour. Has anyone seen that? Where they go into a barn and they'll toss the food around, and the farmer then has to go back and put it all back. Problems. It may be something to do with that, I was saying cows don't like consuming feed which has had saliva on it. And as I said, they're programmed, they're designed to take about 40 to 60,000 bites every day of the grass. Don't do that, then you start getting problems like this. Intersucking and calf-sucking behaviour, both part of the same complex. The calf is programmed to suckle the cow, and it does that. So, okay, here's the cow's teat, a rather big one, but here's the calf's tongue. Okay, grabs the teat and it squeezes the teat, so that this teat system here, if I had it the other way round, you could see it a bit better. It squeezes it so that the teat system expresses the milk. That's not how a milking machine works, and it's not how we often feed cows, because we feed them in buckets. It's not doing that squeezing behaviour. Also, the calf is programmed to do that with its head in a horizontal or an upwards facing position. We give it a bucket to feed, it's standing, it's got its head in the bucket like this, and it's actually sucking. It's not squeezing. So we're again making it do unnatural behaviour. The net result is that it will either go and suck other bits of other calves, their ears, their mouths, or their pails. It will suck anything it can because it has to suck. Some farmers put a little teat in with the milk, but it's not quite the same. Some farmers, of course, connect the milk to a teat, and then the calves can suck naturally, or sorry, squeeze naturally. So the calves will suck each other, and after the calves have developed this sucking behaviour, then they may develop into sucking in adulthood. So cows will come and suck each other's teats. It's the calves that were sucking each other that become into suckers in adulthood. So again, problem behaviours. And I did mention, out of interest, that this is not how the milking machine works. So the milking machine sucks, it doesn't squeeze, and that can damage the cow's teats. It's not really a subject for this course because it's nothing to do with nutrition, but if the milking machine isn't set up properly, then it'll damage the cow's teats because it's sucking, it's evacuating the area around the teat. It's not squeezing as the calf does. Okay. A couple of extra words: toxic agents and pollutants. We've got so this is more on malnutrition weed species, things like ragwort, where the animal needs to learn not to eat the food. How does the animal learn? The influence of the mother is really important. So we looked at this in sheep in some detail. The mother's influence is really important in telling the lambs what to eat. And if you separate the lambs from the ewes at an early age, then they will not have that right knowledge of what to eat. It's the same with all mammals. They learn from their mothers, and yet we separate them. And then we wonder why they're not eating the right sorts of food. And more importantly, they may consume poisonous feeds. Now, herbivores will learn toxic plants in the field, like ragwort. It's a big yellow head. Anyone familiar with ragwort? Maybe you don't have it here. It has a big yellow flower. And so they learn the colour of the flower. If you make hay from that and feed the animals with hay, they don't learn. They can get poisoned quite easily and quickly. And then we've got heavy metals. That is a problem when you're applying sewage sludge, human sewage, to pastures, accumulation in particular of cadmium. And cadmium is potentially damaging to the kidneys of animals if they live long enough. Most don't. they're slaughtered relatively young. But if your dairy cows have consumed a lot of garbage, or if they've eaten on pastures where the sewage sludge has been applied, it's possible they may begin to get kidney problems. We are most likely to get the kidney problems because we're the if we eat the sheep kidney or sheep liver, then we can accumulate cadmium in our kidney, and that can become toxic. So cadmium is one problem. Lead is another. Lead by the roadside, of course. Do you have lead in your petrol still? I think you do. Yeah, anti-knock agent. Very toxic to the rumen bacteria. So we did some research, and we could kill the rumen bacteria by adding pretty small amounts of lead. And also interesting, we found that cattle, they will try and avoid food which has got lead on it. So they learn what's good for them and what isn't. They have that nutritional wisdom. So lead problem. Lead spreads about 1 meter from the edge of the roadside. Not any further. It's very heavy. And once it's in the soil, it's fairly, the uptake into the plant is very low. The toxicity comes from the lead which coats the grass leaves as it falls down to the soil. It's in the fumes. And also when animals are eating soil. So if you have animals that are tethered close to the roadside, they will, and there's very short grass, they'll probably eat quite a bit of soil, and that will have lead in it. Very poisonous to the rumen bacteria. And how can you detect lead in the animals? Anyone familiar with the toxicity signs in the cattle? Any of the vets here will know.
So probably there will be no symptoms.
No.
Nervous symptoms.
No symptoms.
Nervous.
Should be symptoms. Should be symptoms.
So wobbling gait will be there.
Wobbling gait.
Wobbles.
That's hypomagnesemia, I think. Staggers.
Staggering.
Yeah. So what the lead does, it combines with hemoglobin to make met hemoglobin in the animal's body. That stops the animal transporting oxygen.
Hypoxia.
Yes. And the symptoms are
Cyanosis.
blue lips, bluish colours in the lips, because the blood has been drained, the oxygenated blood is being taken out of the blood system. So it's that met hemoglobin which is stopping the blood becoming oxygenated. Blue lips, just remember blue lips for the blood. Radioactive chemicals. I don't know if you've ever had those problems here. There have been some big incidents around the world with liberation of radioactivity. Cesium is the main compound liberated, and that's very toxic to ruminant animals. The Chernobyl disaster, anyone? Yeah. In Ukraine in 1986 was very, very damaging because there were big clouds of cesium were liberated from Chernobyl, and they all went west. They went north and then they went west, and they came across Scandinavia, they came across the United Kingdom, and in fact the sheep which were grazing pastures, particularly on the highlands at that time, were not allowed to be consumed for about 2 or 3 years afterwards. That cesium, because the soil was very acid in the hills, that cesium stayed around for a long, long time in the plants. And cesium is quite mobile, so it's taken up by the plants. Cadmium is quite mobile as well, but remember that lead is not mobile. You can still see lead, which has been sitting around even since Roman times. Of course, the Romans, they loved to add lead to they added lead to their wine to make it sweet. That's what made them a bit crazy, I think. So lead, very, very toxic. Have you heard of the expression, mad as a hatter? That's not lead, that's mercury. But there have also been mercury poisoning incidents where the fish have high mercury contents. In Japan, for instance, there's a major mercury spill. Mercury also affects the brain, mad as a hatter in Alice in Wonderland. Anyone familiar with that? The reason being, mercury was used in the felting process for making hats in Victorian times, and so it was also volatile. So the hatters, the people making the hats, would get a bit crazy because of the smell of all the mercury. Okay, I'm digressing. Let's talk about nutrition and immunity. Really important, because the immune system, of course, is very important for an animal's welfare because it protects against diseases. It's the proteins which are most important, the amino acids. The main antibodies, of course, are immunoglobulins. They are proteins. And so the protein supply is really important. The dietary amino acids regulate antibody titers. They regulate the activation of lymphocytes and macrophages. Those are the body's defense mechanisms when an infection starts in the body. So good protein nutrition is really important. Also for gastrointestinal parasites. Sheep, of course, get a lot of gastrointestinal parasites, Haemoncus in particular. And good protein nutrition is a way of guarding against that. The gut is like your second brain. It has so many functions. It has its own immune system. It can almost think, because it is such a complex organ, the gut. And that's where a lot of this is happening with nutrition and immunity. The gut will recognize those toxic compounds. It recognizes lead in the feed. It starts to mop it up and sequester it in the liver. Okay, it's only when the liver gets overloaded that it liberates it all. It goes into the kidneys and starts poisoning the animal, something like cadmium. So good protein nutrition really important. Energy not so important. Some of the minerals and vitamins are important as well. Zinc, very important for your skin. Zinc, iron, selenium and molybdenum are all important for a well-functioning immune system. And also the vitamins A and D. And then we've got some of the plant secondary metabolites, the tannins, especially the condensed tannins. Essentially what these are doing is they are protecting the proteins that the animals are consuming. Now we will see later on in our very final session, when we talk about protein nutrition, we will see that the ruminant animal has two sources of protein. Okay, it has the protein coming from the microorganisms, and it also has the protein which has bypassed the rumen and is then digested in the small intestine in just the same way that you and I are digesting our protein in our small intestine. So two sources. And if the animal needs a lot of protein, it has to use both of those sources. It cannot get enough just from the microorganisms. So if you have a very high-yielding dairy cow, you have to feed it so-called bypass protein, protein which doesn't get digested in the rumen and it escapes the rumen digestion. And essentially what some of the plant protecting agents are doing are like tannins. They are protecting the proteins from digestion. Now the plant thinks that's pretty clever. Animals aren't going to eat me if I stop the proteins being digested, but they are digested later on. They're just not digested in the rumen. So this again can help to reduce parasitism by providing better protein supply, that bypass protein. Okay, moving on, antibiotics in feeds. I'm covering a lot of ground here, I'm afraid quite deliberately. We're covering a lot of the sort of harder science elements of animal nutrition and welfare today. So apologies for that. If anyone's finding it heavy going, just shout if you don't understand anything. You're all aware, I'm sure, of the controversy around antibiotics in feeds, mainly for poultry and pigs, but particularly for poultry. Because there is quite good evidence now that antibiotic resistance is emerging to substances like flavomycin, flavomycin here, one of the most commonly used antibiotics. Why do we feed antibiotics to chickens?
Make them survive the bad conditions.
Let's go.
Yes, a little bit of both, but mainly growth promotion. If there were really bad conditions, yes, antibiotics would knock any bacteria on the head. But essentially, it is cleaning the gut of bacteria, so that because bacteria are expensive to feed. You know, why is the cow 10 times less efficient than the chicken? Well, not quite. We measure that in feed conversion ratio. So I need to think about that a little bit. The feed conversion ratio of a cow, of let's say a growing cattle animal. How many kilograms of feed do you have to feed it for
4:1.
Doing pretty well if you get 4 to 1 from growing animals. A little bit more. 1:2.
2 kg per. In case of chicken, it's 1:2.
Chicken 2 to 1. Yes. Cattle usually between 6 and 10 to 1 really. You're doing very well if you're getting 4 to 1. Maybe you've got some really good production systems. I usually reckon with low quality rangeland, you're looking at 10 kilograms of feed for 1 kilogram of live weight gain. But the food is low quality. Whereas with chickens, it's 2 kilograms to 1. And there's such a push for the chicken producers to become more efficient that they add the antibiotics to clean the gut of any bacteria. Pretty nasty practice, really. It's a growth promoter. It interferes with murine synthesis in the cell wall, and through that mechanism, it's able to kill out some of the pathogenic bacteria, the E. coli and the Salmonella, but it doesn't touch the lactobacilli and the bifidobacteria. Now, the evidence of antibiotic resistance in farm animals is coming quite strong. It's coming thick and fast. It's been known for quite a while in chickens that there has been transmission of that antibiotic resistance to humans. I won't say it's widespread, but it has happened. So if it has happened once, it can happen quite commonly. And before we know it, then the human antibiotics will not work. But we're now getting evidence in dairy cows. Of course, dairy cows would normally get antibiotic injections into the mammary gland at the end of the lactation, or at least in traditional Western practices. You may not do that here, I don't know. Dry cow therapy. Do you do that?
It's not common here.
Not common. Good. Yes. You will not have the antibiotic resistance which is emerging in Western countries. So we need to look for alternatives to antibiotics, and the research with chickens at least is looking pretty positive. The probiotics, which are microbial feed supplements, are really just as able to inhibit pathogenic bacteria. They also have quite beneficial effects in lowering cholesterol, and they have big effects on the morphology of the gut, particularly some of the villi, and which we don't fully understand, but some of the research I've just recently been involved in is showing, yes, increased immune function when we look at responses to vaccination against Newcastle disease, for example. Increased immune function and inhibiting pathogenic bacteria. So the probiotics are one possibility. The prebiotics are another, where we can give some of the nutrient requirements of the probiotics as an additive. So encourage the gut to have good nutrition for the probiotics. So this will actually promote the growth of the lactobacilli and the bifidobacteria, and again reduces the pathogenic bacteria. Now, when we put those two together, so-called in the symbiotics, which is a probiotic plus a prebiotic, I should say, sorry, there's a mistake there. When we put those two together, we should get synergistic behavior. In other words, the two are better than either one alone. in promoting beneficial microbiota. And the research so far is looking very, very positive. I'm not sure the chicken industry is quite ready for it, but it's quite feasible to get the same benefits using probiotics and prebiotics. It's also possible to use medicinal plants. A couple that we've been looking at are Thymus vulgaris, which has had some very beneficial effects on increasing antibody titers, and another one, sumac, which is a berry, a little red berry, grown in the United States. If you get, grows on the roadsides. Maybe don't get that here. A lot of antioxidants in it, not quite the same beneficial effects. But some of these homeopathic remedies and medicinal plants seem to be working very well. Okay, I'm going to just wrap up in a minute. I'll finish on consideration of nutrition and welfare, but I wanted just to speculate. We've been talking about the current situation and how things have evolved. What about the future? What are the challenges that are going to face people involved in animal welfare and nutrition? Well, without doubt, one of the big ones is going to be increased temperatures. Just think about the issues I've spoken about, the issues of drought, the variability in the weather. Both are increasing as a result of global warming, both temperature and climate variability. So that will affect our rangeland farmers much more than any others. It won't affect the chicken farmers to such a great extent, but it will affect those keeping cattle and sheep on extensive rangelands much more because of that big variability and because of the high temperatures. Cattle, yes, they may survive in hot conditions, but because of their morphology, because of the way they're made, they have that big fermentation vat in their rumen. They're producing enormous amounts of heat, much more than any other livestock that we keep. And so they're not really ideally suited for keeping in very hot, dry conditions. Because of that huge amount of heat they produce, their upper critical temperature, that is the temperature at which they start to physiologically physiologically having to work, sweating, panting, etc., to lose heat. What's their upper critical temperature? Does anyone know for cattle?
So it's 34 stars, and what you give us is more than 28.
I thought you said 27. If you had, you'd have been right. It is 27 degrees centigrade when cattle start having to work to lose heat. Now, there's a bit of flexibility around the types of cattle, whether they have a sleek coat, whether they have lots of sweating capacity, etc., etc. But it is amazingly low, the upper critical temperature. You know, contrast that with, say, your eland or your oryx. It's probably 35, 36 degrees. And when the temperatures go over 40 degrees, of course, you're blowing hot air at the animal, you're actually heating it up. And so on the ships coming over from Australia to Asia, temperatures often exceed 40 degrees when they get into port, in Muscat, for example. Very hot, very humid. The animals are working so hard to try and lose heat. And that's all because we're using ruminant animals. So that's one problem. And if you look at the impact of global warming on the temperatures in the Middle East, I don't know about India, but it is a much bigger impact than in many other parts of the world. Just like in Australia, it's the hottest areas that are going to become even hotter. The cooler areas are not affected as much. And then we've got increased undernutrition in the marginal lands as a result of that. I won't talk about this now because our very last session will be devoted to the future, increased demand for animal products and livestock intensification. I won't do that now because we'll have a whole session on that. So just to conclude, before we wrap up, Nutrition is the biggest welfare problem, I think, for rangeland cattle and sheep. Undernutrition will almost certainly be an even greater welfare problem in the future. There are also short-term feed restrictions, usually associated with transport. And what I didn't mention here is that actually in Australia, many of the sale yards or the abattoirs, they don't allow producers, farmers, they don't allow them to feed their animals for 24 hours before they get transported. Anyone know why that is? That seems rather silly from all we've said about the welfare impact. Why are they not allowed to be fed 24 hours before they get to the sale yard? It's because they don't want to clear the mess up.
They reduce the risk of infection.
Sorry?
They reduce the risk of infection.
That's partly it. Reduce the risk of contamination of the coats, which might then get onto the meat if they're meat animals. It's also because they don't want to clear the mess up in the trucks. You stop the animals defecating, they don't make a mess in the trucks. It also means they don't slip in the trucks, which can be dangerous for the animals. So there are good reasons for doing it. In relation to the risk of infection, I would argue that depriving animals of feed before slaughter
To stimulate the metabolism.
yes, but it also stimulates the enteropathogenic bacteria. And so you have less risk of infection, but if you do get an infection of the carcass, it's going to be a more serious infection, because you may have E. coli grown in the or salmonella in the gut during that period when the animal is deprived of food. So it's not necessarily a good idea to deprive of food before transporting. Okay, we've also talked about clinical malnutrition, which is often controlled, but it affects particularly early lactation of cows. We've talked about feeding behaviour problems, and we've talked about pollutants and toxic agents. And with that, I must shut up because I've talked for far too long. But if anyone has any questions or wants to discuss anything, more than happy to do so. Anything anyone wants to raise? All happy?
I just have a question. We talked about what are the best ways. You touched upon what is the best way to feed cows, right? In your example on whether to feed them with buckets or bottles or directly from cattle. What are some of the best practices to feed cattle? Like in India, commonly we say elevated mangers or elevated feeding troughs are used at certain places. But now increasingly we are seeing that they are being fed at the fence line.
Right.
So what are the ideal best practices to feed cattle, and is it generic or it differentiates from systems and species?
Yeah. I mean, yes, it's very dependent, of course, on their natural feeding behaviour. So for cattle, it is browsing and grazing. So there was for a long time a belief that feeding cattle high up would lead to bad feeding behaviours and some poor digestion, because what we see in the calves when they're feeding high up, that the milk is able to bypass the rumen and go into the upper mason. It can bypass the rumen, and that stops it spoiling in the rumen. And there's a thought as well that with cows you can get some bypass protein by feeding them high up. But I think what I've seen recently, people are saying no, it is better to feed cattle from the floor. It's a more natural feeding behaviour. But I haven't seen any scientific studies on that. Only hearsay. Any others? Yes.
So antibiotics. Antibiotics are banned by European Union for the use of these animals.
Yeah.
So what about this Australia? In India also some antibiotics are banned.
I'm not quite sure where Australia is. Last thing I heard, there were 4 acceptable antibiotics, but that may have changed. I'll look it up. double check. The work I've been doing on antibiotic replacements is actually with researchers in Iran, where they're, regardless of the legality, I think every chicken farmer needs to be looking for alternatives. There's always a concern with the probiotics, though. Perhaps our colleague who's working on probiotics. Are you who's working on? Oh yeah, okay. There's always a concern, isn't there, that they're not actually active. Some of them may not be active.
Some sort of multi-species probiotic formulations are effective. Then some negative pathogen effects.
Is it still a problem that the probiotics may not be active in the feed? It used to be a problem some years ago, I think. Yeah, that the preparation process would be denaturing the bacteria. So yeah, nothing's easy. Yeah, but the research, you'll have seen more of the research than I have. I think the research, if you correct me if I'm wrong, it looks pretty positive with probiotics. Yeah, you're looking at calves, feeding calves, buffalo calves, was it? Of course, I think generally the results with calves are pretty clear cut. There should be good benefits in reducing disease or feeding probiotics, particularly when the calves are in dirty conditions. When the conditions are bad. What is less clear is that there are any benefits for adult ruminant animals of feeding probiotics.
Source of
Microbial protein. Okay, you're cynic. You're skeptical about there being any benefits. There's quite good evidence now with yeasts for ruminant animals. So some microorganisms can have pretty beneficial effects in the rumen. I used to be very skeptical as well, but I'm now beginning to believe that some microorganisms, feeding some microorganisms can be beneficial. The argument is that if you're adding small amounts of bacteria to the rumen, you're putting it into an enormous feeding vat with millions, if not trillions, of bacteria in there. What difference can they make? But if you look at the yeasts, then seeding the rumen fluid can be quite beneficial in terms of increasing the efficiency of digestion. And there is a huge amount of research going on at the moment to try and reduce the methane output of the bacteria, because the eruptation or release of methane by the mouth from ruminant animals is a pretty serious greenhouse gas. Any other points? Okay, we'll close there and look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you for coming today.